Thank you. My name is Runa Falck, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Bergen, where I write a dissertation on lifestyle in a climate perspective. And today I would like to talk to you about a paper I'm working on, about a study on how citizens and politicians attribute responsibility for climate mitigation to different actors. So as you're all probably well aware of, the goal of the Paris Agreement is to limit global warming to well below 2, preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius, compared to pre-industrial levels. And to achieve this goal, it is necessary to transition into a low-carbon society. This transition demands that our society cuts carbon emissions either through reduced consumption or through a replacement of fossil fuels, or most likely both. However, there is an ongoing debate about which actor or actors should be considered responsible for this transition and these carbon emission cuts. Before I move on to explain the issue with this debate, I just want to note that there are, of course, many ways to understand the term responsibility. For example, a distinction has been made between causal and treatment responsibility, and in this paper, I'm concentrating on treatment attribution. So that is the responsibility for tackling the problem and not for causing it. I'd like to begin by drawing your attention to an article written by Nick Pigeon in 2012. He suggests that the most significant risk to achieving ambitious climate mitigation and adaptation goals appears to be the governance trap, engendered by current national and international systems of governance, such that the public and governments each seek to attribute responsibility for instigating change to the other. In other words, he describes a chicken or the egg situation. Research on individuals finds that people believe that responsibility for tackling climate change lies primarily at the state level. At the same time, politicians typically fear that they will be punished in the next election if they attempt to force people to accept more radical change in lifestyle through new environmental taxes or stricter legislation. According to Pigeon, politicians therefore place responsibility for climate mitigation back onto individuals or communities. And since both the government and the governed seek to attribute primary responsibility to the other, neither party acts in a decisive way, and the result is collective inaction. In this study, I'm testing whether this claim that the public and governments each seek to attribute responsibility to the other is accurate. The research question is, how do politicians attribute responsibility for climate mitigation compared to the population? A match between politicians and citizens' attribution could have both positive and negative consequences depending on the attribution. And the same is true for a mismatch. For example, given the significant role that felt responsibility plays for climate action, it would be good news for the Paris Agreement if all actors view themselves as most responsible. That is, if politicians attribute most responsibility to politicians, whereas the population attribute most responsibility to individuals. The least productive scenario would be a mismatch where each actor externalizes the responsibility to other actors and no one takes responsibility, since denying responsibility would probably lead to inaction. A match of attribution, where both politicians and citizens primarily attribute the responsibility to politicians, would probably also be a constructive scenario. However, if both politicians and citizens think that climate mitigation is primarily the responsibility of individuals, that could be problematic since individuals do not have the same power as politicians to enact large-scale mitigation measures. To find out whether there is a mismatch or a case of a governance trap between politicians and individuals, I collected data through 2 different online surveys, the panel of elected representatives and the Norwegian citizen panel. The panel of elected representatives is distributed to all elected representatives at all political levels in Norway. And naturally, since there are more local politicians than national politicians, most of the respondents in the survey are local politicians at the municipal and county level. But there are also some from the national parliament and even from the Sami parliament. The Norwegian citizen panel is based on a probability sample of the general Norwegian population above the age of 18. And both surveys were fielded in this spring, and the number of respondents was over 1,000 in the panel of elected representatives and over 2,000 in the citizen panel. Respondents in both surveys were asked in identical ways to what extent they think that individuals, the local and regional authorities, municipalities and counties, the national authorities, the state, the international community, and business and industry are responsible for climate mitigation. And they were asked to rate each actor on a 5-point Likert scale from not at all to a very large extent. I haven't completed the analysis of the data yet, but I will show you some preliminary results. This graph compares the results from the Norwegian citizen panel in blue to the results from the panel of elected representatives in red. And the black lines show the confidence intervals. And 5 on the scale represents to a very large extent. So the longer the bar, the more responsibility is attributed to the given actor. What I find is that by and large, politicians and the population attribute a great extent of responsibility to all actors. So as you can see, all the predicted values are above 3 on the scale, against the value to some extent. So they're all considered responsible to some extent or higher. Furthermore, for each actor, politicians attribute more responsibility compared to the population. So as you can see, the red bars are longer than the blue for all of the actors. Even so, politicians and the population rank the actors in the same order. So politicians and citizens seem to agree regarding attribution of responsibility for climate mitigation. So they both attribute most responsibility to the international community, followed by national authorities, then private business, local authorities, and they both attribute the least responsibility to individuals. In other words, there is nothing in these data that points to a governance trap. And it does not look like the public and governments attribute responsibility for climate mitigation to each other. It is, of course, possible that national politicians, which is what we normally refer to when we talk about government, stand out compared to local and regional politicians. In this graph, I have therefore discriminated between local and national politicians. So here, the red bars represent the population, the green bars represent the local politicians, and the blue bars represent the national politicians. And these data show the same pattern as the previous graph. So both local and national politicians, the green and the blue bars, attribute less responsibility for climate mitigation to individuals than to local and especially national authorities. For national politicians, this difference is not statistically significant. As you can see, the confidence intervals for the blue bars, the national politicians, are large, and that is because there are only 25 national politicians in the dataset. But despite this uncertainty, the data indicate that national politicians do not differ in any remarkable way from local politicians. Based on these 25 respondents, it appears inaccurate to claim that the government attributes primary responsibility for climate mitigation to individuals. I will end this presentation with a summary of the key findings. First, the results from the study show that there is congruence between citizens and politicians regarding attribution of responsibility for climate mitigation. The study therefore does not provide evidence of a governance trap. If anything, politicians tend to ascribe more responsibility to all the actors, including themselves. It could, of course, still be the case that politicians are worried about re-election and are waiting for the public to instigate change before they dare to make radical political decisions. And further research is required to establish whether there is a governance trap in this sense. But it's simply not true that politicians attribute the primary responsibility for climate mitigation to individuals. However, the present study reveals that even if politicians and individuals don't blame each other, they do tend to externalize responsibility to other actors. In particular, individuals and local politicians place more responsibility with private business, national authorities, and the international community than with themselves. And externalizing responsibility is one of the main barriers to climate action. At the same time, the potential for high impact mitigation is greater at the national and global levels, and perhaps also for private business. So it is reasonable to attribute more responsibility to these actors than to individuals and local authorities. In order to transition into a low carbon society, in line with the goals of the Paris Agreement that I mentioned at the start of the talk, it is therefore crucial that these actors, the national politicians, the global community, and a private business, do not externalize responsibility, but agree that they do indeed carry the primary responsibility for climate mitigation and take climate action. So that was all I had. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and in advance with the schedule. So okay, I don't know if there are comments or in English or français. Oui. I will say again the question because it's in the room here. So
I was just wondering if it was relevant to actually sort the different actors in the sense that you cannot put a high score to all of them, but to sort them from 1 to 5.
Was it relevant to sort the different actors in order to
actually say, okay, this one is the biggest.
In order to say this is the biggest responsible.
Yeah, rather than to say, okay, all of them are responsible and I don't care.
Instead of everybody is responsible, and I don't know if I was able to sum up your question in a good way, but
I can try to answer, and we'll see.
It is coming because it's quite technical. Technical aspect, yeah.
So I wanted to know if in your study or in your field it could have been relevant to actually do not leave the option to the people who answered the survey to give a high share of responsibility to all the actors, in the sense that it could have some different results, and it could drive different conclusions if you can allow. I mean, if you can only say, okay, international community, he's the biggest responsible, and then afterwards will be the individuals and so on. So if it was relevant to do it,
okay,
instead of
sort of hierarchy,
yeah,
of responsibility, instead of just saying who is responsible, how much, yeah, to have a hierarchy, you know, sort of.
Yeah, if it was relevant, previous studies have done it the way I think you're suggesting, that you have to rank who is which of these actors are responsible, or which actors are most responsible. I wanted to put the question so that the respondents were able to say that all were responsible to a very large extent if they think that everyone is equally responsible. And I would also open up for saying that no one is responsible, because that's also an opinion that a respondent could have. So I didn't want to force the respondents to rank or to say that some are responsible, some are not. And I think that adds value to my findings. So it is a finding that everyone is considered responsible to some extent or more, because one could also imagine when I look, for example, at the party differences, we can see that the parties that don't care so much about the climate issue, they attribute less responsibility to all of the actors. But yeah, I don't know, was that the answer? Yeah, thumbs up. But it's true that previous studies have done it the way that you suggest. So I guess it's also an intuitive way to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, because it's interesting to continue, because of course on one side it's interesting, it's a good thing that everybody is responsible in the opinion of everybody else. But on the other side, yeah, you need to make a ranking up to say that something is more urgent than something else, and in some senses to create hierarchies. So it's interesting to have also a qualitative aspect of the research, perhaps, in order to understand what is the discourse. And I know that in Bergen you work on also on this side. So we have 2 questions from the virtual room. So I don't think it's Otto or someone else. Anyway, Otto, you can make your question. Thanks.
Okay, great, thank you. And thank you so much, Runa, for the interesting presentation. I just have a question regarding your findings. I just wonder if in what way were you surprised about these findings, and in what way do you think that these represent like a Norwegian context?
Yeah, 2 very good questions. Was I surprised? In hindsight, no. But I guess I had expected to see a pattern more similar to the governance trap, because that's the idea, right? That, oh, politicians blame individuals. So I guess I was surprised to see that politicians take so much responsibility themselves, and that they take more responsibility, or like they place more responsibility all over. Of course, politicians are likely to be more higher educated, and that could also affect the results. And regarding the generalizability, it's actually something I had written down in the manuscript that I should ask about, because I'm not sure. Of course, the Eurobarometer asks a similar question, and that's asked to all European countries, and they find that there are big differences between the countries. So I guess I can't say that this will be true for other countries. At the same time, there is not anything that is very unique about Norway in this sense either. So I don't know. I have to think about the generalizability, and I would be happy to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah. It's interesting to compare to other European countries, but it's I remember some data as it's quite a diverse situation from the Eastern Europe to the Western one to the Northern one. So it's really for the environment, there is a very different sensibility, I think, very different perception.
Yeah, and I'm also like thinking in lines with that Norway is one of the few oil producing countries in Europe, if that has anything to do with it. And I could just add that in terms of responsibility, since I'm focusing on cross-sector collaboration, and responsibility is very much connected to my research as well, that there have been that in terms of collaboration, this is suggested as a way of hollowing the responsibility, that these kind of politicians creating collaboration in order to kind of make the whole responsibility issue more diffuse. So I don't know how your further PhD project will look, but if you're interested in how the politician respond to responsibility, collaboration might be an interesting concept to look at.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I was also surprised by the high extent of responsibility attributed to the international community. And the international community in many of the previous surveys I have seen, it's not included as a variable. Mm. And I think it makes sense that one sees the international community as the main problem solver, but it's also problematic since it's very vague concept. Who are people thinking of when they put the responsibility with the international community? Could be so many different actors and no one really.
Yeah, that's true. It's quite a vague variable. It's all the planet, all the humanity, or I don't know. Yeah, it's quite. Okay, the conversation, someone said that there is a poll on French elected officials, and it'd be interesting to compare. I don't know if there are other questions or comments. No. Yes. Yeah. Oh, thank you very much, Lucas Franco.
Hey, yes, maybe I can just add a couple of words on that. I think it might be very interesting for you to look into it, and it's because it actually compares answers. It's local elected officials, so they're only local officials, and it's a small sample. It's a 500 people sample, but it's actually the very same questions asked to the general public with a bigger. Actually, the panel is quite large, and well, it's a nationally representative. We're in France, so we're talking quotas and not a randomized sample, but that's the way we do it in France. And yeah, so I guess it might be a useful resource if you want to do some comparison.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much. That's very useful. Yeah.
Nice, very nice. Thank you. Okay, I think that we can say thank you to Ms. Falk. Thank you very much, and good luck for the rest and the future of your research on this topic. And there is a question from no, Miriam, do you want to?
Yes, if there's time, I would. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot for this presentation. It's this study project sounds really interesting, and I was wondering. I mean, I get how you could divide the politicians into the parties, but are you also asking the citizens or individuals about what they vote for, or self-assessment about their if they're liberal or conservative, and also I think I'm sure you did the demographic attributes. So if there are any kinds of differences between women or men, which are, or also age, which are interesting. I don't know if you have already analyzed or if you analyze it at all.
Yeah, I did not look at the demographic variables yet, but we'll of course have to do that. And it will be interesting. Of course, we know that gender and age affects other attitudes on climate change, but it's not given how it will affect the attribution of responsibility. So that could be very interesting to see. Here is on the different parties. So it begins to the left here, Red Party, and then Socialist Left Party, Labour Party, Centre Party, Green Party, so on. And then I've plotted so that the yellow ones represent the attributed responsibility for individuals, or predicted attribution. And then this brown, red is the local and regional authorities, and blue is the what I call the private trade and industry, but in the presentation I called it private business. And then green is international community. You can see there are quite some differences between the parties. So here on the left, the Red Party, the Socialist Left Party, and the Green Party, and I think also the Labour Party, attribute statistically significant less responsibility to individuals, whereas on the right side of the spectrum, the parties, the Conservative Party, the Progress Party, which is like a populist right party, and also this Centre Party, it's like an agrarian party, attribute statistically significant more responsibility to this international community, whatever that is. And what is interesting is that the pattern for the population, the results from the Norwegian Citizen Panel, shows the same pattern. So the same parties attribute less to individuals and more to the global community. So it confirms at least that there is congruence between politicians and voters, and that there are ideological differences, and they're not entirely left and right, which is also the common thing for the climate issue. It goes across the traditional political lines, but it will be interesting to see with the standard demographic variables. Thank you for the question. Now I also got to use my extra slides.